Okay, so we're getting closer to the end of the semester, so you'll start to see more annoying messages come out for me, just to kind of keep you informed on things. And if you're missing a couple assignments here and there, you might even get an email or a message from the grade book with some opportunities. But keep an eye on your deadlines as far as the interview and your final project. You don't want to miss the deadline on that if you can help it. And if you're having an issue with anything, make sure you get a hold of me ahead of time. Don't wait until the last minute, and then give me some time to help you work through whatever it is that you're working through. That's a little bit easier for me. So to go back to last week's assignment, so the one that was due back on Sunday the 2nd, we did the search warrant exercise. And this was pretty much the assignment. I threw the DA manual in there if you wanted to look at it. And then basically the affidavit part was the information from your neighbor and from, information on an informant. And I gave you 4 different headings that I wanted you to use. And when I recommend the headings, please use those because they're meant to make it a little bit easier for you as we, kind of get into not this week's. This week's assignment's kind of a little bit of a break, and then we have a domestic violence report before the end of the semester, which is the following week. But just a couple examples so you can just take a look at how some other students may have laid things out. So when you do your description of scene, remember, it needs to be thorough enough to where when the judge looks at it, they know that you actually went out and took a look at it, that you viewed it because of mistakes that happen with maybe serving a warrant at the wrong house. So that's why they really want you to be descriptive. The suspects was pretty easy, but, again, you're going to want to, number them and then put in their alias if they have one, their height, their weight, their birthday, if you have it all. This individual put the vehicles to be searched, which is fine. And then remember your probable cause. This is the part to where you're convincing the judge that you have enough probable cause to search this person's house and that whatever you're looking for is going to be there. So it really needs to be a little bit of, it doesn't have to be a lot. And you almost can write this like you're interviewing a person. This, because that's how it's going to happen with you when an informant or somebody tells you information. You're going to write that in your affidavit. My informant said this, or this person said that. So it's going to be almost like an interview. So just make sure that, and this is pretty good length, that there's enough information in here to kind of convince that judge, that magistrate, that, hey, there must be something going on there. I think it's this, and I think you're right. You're going to find it there. So that's really important. Then on your evidence, make sure that you're detailed enough. And this was kind of a test run for everybody just to show you or to kind of get you thinking on what would go, what would fall underneath this particular warrant. So we were looking for narcotics in this particular one. It was kind of a meth lab. So keep that in mind. A lot of the search warrant, like evidence to be seized when you write a warrant, when you get into law enforcement and you write a warrant, a lot of that's a template. It's already built into the search warrant. So you don't have to come up with it, but there might be something that you want to add or take out or whatever. So this is just an example of how to kind of put stuff in there, because it really does, it helps, again, when you're trying to figure out, is there really enough? So your probable cause needs to be a little bit more than a couple of sentences, because you have to convince that person. Another example, same thing, the probable cause written really nicely, kind of, where this person told me this, this person told me that, and there you have it. So, convincing, same thing with suspect information as much as you can. If the info says there's a tattoo, you put that in there. If it says this, you put that in there. So you want to put in as much as you can. And the same with the description. Make sure that you are describing it as detailed as you can. And that's a really good application for a search warrant, to really put in as much detail. And then your evidence, as much as you, and again, this is templated usually, but I wanted you to kind of think, hey, what might we find or what fits with drugs? And here was a really good one, utility bills. Because typically if you have a marijuana grow in your house or you have a meth lab, you're going to burn a lot of electricity. So getting those electric bills that's going to help show that this person is using more electricity. Doesn't mean just because their electric bill is high that they're a drug dealer, but when you put all those pieces together, then it really, it means something. So, and you can get that from the local, electric company that's in that jurisdiction. They're very, very helpful when it comes to giving you information. So again, when you looked at these pictures, you're going to want to describe it as much as you can. And you don't have to go crazy, but just enough to where, the judge is going to understand that, hey, based on this description, I'm pretty sure that officer went out there and took pictures of this place, diagrammed it, knows what it is, and it's just the exterior. You don't have to say anything about the interior because typically you've never been inside. So good job. And that was kind of that week's assignment. The next week, or the current week that we're in right now, isn't too difficult, and we'll scoot to that one just really quick. This is to kind of give you a quick break before we get to the end of the semester. So I think this one was just a supplemental report if my brain is thinking correctly. Let's see, where are we at? So I think it's here. Yeah, so this particular scenario goes along with your discussion post. So when you do the discussion, you'll see that they kind of fit together. But this is basically more geared toward an interview. So again, this is to help you practice on documenting your interview. And I put the section in here that supposedly has been violated. So this will basically be a follow-up report, which is just you can do the face page if you want, but you don't have to, or it can just be the supplemental, right? So just the narrative, and it's a supplemental report that you would attach to the original crime report. So that's the break before we get into the last week and we do the domestic violence report. So that one, we're going to want a little more detail. So the purpose of this one is to kind of get you on the interview track again. And then it'll help you for the following week. So any questions so far? Everybody feeling good? Life is good. Okay. All right. So our lecture for this week it's not going to be very long, but it's going to cover what we call miscellaneous forms. And there's a lot of them, and we're not going to go over all of them because it would take us a while. And remember, different departments have different forms a lot of times. But these are some kind of miscellaneous forms that you're going to tend to run across. And the textbook uses a little bit of, I want to say, Eastern law enforcement language. So when they talk about pickup warrants, it doesn't mean like a pickup truck. It basically means like you enter a warrant into the system, and if an officer runs across that person, they have the ability to take them into custody. So let's just say that you got a traffic warrant for your arrest and you got pulled over for no license plate light or whatever it is, and the officer runs your name in the system and up pops a warrant. That's kind of what we're going to talk about here, and I'm going to show you a couple different teletypes so you can kind of see what they look like. But we want you to be familiar with some of these things, especially the NCIC system, which is really important because this is where a lot of your entries for stolen property, stolen vehicles, and things like that go into. And then we're going to talk a little bit about chain of custody on how to book evidence, because that's going to be really important for you as well. And this is to also help you understand that just because you're booking evidence doesn't mean you can kind of slack off on what you write, because a lot of the details on what you write are going to show up later on. So you still want to be thorough and factual and accurate at whatever it is that you're doing as it relates to, booking property, filling out information for a warrant, etc. So this is the National Crime Information Center website. And just to kind of give you a quick look at it, and hopefully this works for me. Okay, so it's NCIC for short. And the reason that it's important is because this is kind of an electronic clearinghouse of data, of crime data, that's available for any law enforcement officer in the United States. So this isn't just California, it's across the U.S. All right, and it's a clearinghouse of things like mugshots, crime records. It also has a lot of information on wanted persons, fugitives, missing people. So people that walk away, they're missing, elderly or young, etc. Stolen property. So when you enter stolen property and you put that serial number in the report, the records person will enter that data into NCIC. So if another law enforcement officer runs across that property, it'll show stolen in whatever state you're in. Okay, it's used for terrorism, for officer safety, and there's a lot of information. So this page kind of gives you a little bit more about how NCIC is used, but it's used by every law enforcement agency, and a lot of your records clerks, etc., that work in police departments and property officers, they use NCIC quite a bit, along with dispatch as well. And again, it also tracks stolen articles, boats, guns, license plates, different parts of things, vehicles, securities, and even fugitives. It covers the sex offender registry. So you can run someone, what we call NCIC, and find out if they're a registrant somewhere, if they're a gang member, if they have a protective order against them, if they're a missing person, etc. So there's just a lot there. So that's why this website is so important. And I thought we would take, just a minute to kind of show it to you. All right, let me pop back in here. Okay, and then the link is there that if you want to you go to it, you can. But the NCIC, or the National Crime Information Center, has really, they kind of call it the lifeline of law enforcement, because it is that electronic clearinghouse, again, of crime data that can be tapped into by virtually every criminal justice agency, and they all use it. And it's open all the time. It doesn't work 8 to 5. Okay, it's 24 hours a day, 365. So if you need to run something, or even if you wanted to call them, there's always going to be someone available to assist you there. And this NCIC, it helps criminal justice professionals apprehend fugitives, locate missing people, recover stolen property, and even identify terrorists. It also assists law enforcement officers in performing their everyday duties more safely, and provides information necessary to protect the public, like wanted folks, or fugitives, or escapees, or even people with just warrants. That information typically is going to be something through NCIC. So it was launched way back in January 27, 1967, and it didn't have a lot of data. By the end of 2015, it contained over 12 million active records in 21 different files. So there's a lot of information that you can get through NCIC. So, and I think did anybody have a question? I thought I saw my little question box pop up, but then I lost it. Okay, I guess not. Okay, so what they call a pickup or an NCIC want. And this is basically a form that's used when law enforcement investigates a crime, when there's probable cause to make an arrest, but you can't find the suspect. Okay, and the officer will complete what is commonly known as a pickup warrant, or a bulletin, etc. And I'll show you a couple examples for that wanted person, because a lot of times you don't have your suspect. You may have an identification, but you don't have them there. So how is it that you find them? And once someone else finds them, how do they, how do you kind of make that exchange, etc.? So the pickup is again, that it's a form that has a lot of the case information in it. The wanted person's name, the severity of the crime, and any other information that's used. And here's kind of a little example of one. So this would be an example of what we call a warrant abstract. And it's got the person's name, the crime, etc., the amount of bail. So if you look way down in the corner right here, you can see it's a $10,000 warrant issued out of this court for that particular person. So that if an officer ran across them in any state, they could arrest them on that particular warrant, and the bail would be, it's a $10,000 warrant. So the information from this pickup, as they call it, is typically entered into NCIC by a records person. Remember, I talked about records specialists, records clerks, records officer, different names for depending upon where you're at. And once that wanted person's information is entered into NCIC, every law enforcement agency in the nation has access to it. And that's important because if they're wanted for murder in Virginia and there's an NCIC warrant out for them, if we run them here in California, we will get that information. So it's kind of it's a database that connects all agencies, which is actually pretty cool. So if that person is contacted in another state during, let's say, a traffic stop or any other type encounter, that person's name will be checked through NCIC. It's kind of automatic when your dispatchers run someone for wants and warrants, as we call it. They run them through NCIC, and that in turn will show that the person is wanted in a different jurisdiction or even in your own jurisdiction. So, so this is kind of the safety factor. Keep in mind that this NCIC warrant, if you will, or pickup, as they kind of call it, it's there's no real universal form for it. It's kind of I'll show you what it looks like. It's kind of a teletype looking thing. And don't confuse it with an arrest warrant. That's separate, okay? Or a probable cause affidavit, which we just wrote, okay? Or even a writ of commitment. This form is nothing more than a form that's used to expedite the processing of information, in an arrest warrant, probable cause affidavit, or this writ. So, again, if you don't have your suspect, and again, I'm coming up on a couple examples. So same thing for a want for a vehicle. So if you have a vehicle that was, let's say, involved in a felony hit and run, they got in an accident, someone was hurt, and they fled the scene. Maybe no one knew who the driver was, okay, because they left, but you might have the license plate, and you can enter that license plate, the vehicle itself, into NCIC as a felony vehicle. And that's what happens with a stolen car. You don't know who stole the car, but you enter the car as stolen, and that way if an officer runs the license plate, it comes back stolen. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, right? So that's how NCI is kind of used. Same with a missing person. You enter them into NCIC, and then if they're found in another state, it's going to show, hey, this person's a missing person from California. We should figure out how to get them home, etc. So that's how kind of large the system is. And then you've probably heard this phrase before, is that there's a thing called an all points bulletin, an APB. This kind of old language, but it's still there. And this is typically a broadcast issued from law enforcement to its personnel or other agencies, and it usually contains information about a wanted suspect to be arrested, or a person of interest, or a vehicle. So I think I have a picture of one in a second. So same thing, an all points bulletin is also known as what they call a BOLO. So it's like be on the lookout. So there's all these, acronyms for policing, of course, or even an attempt to locate. So there's different terms that kind of fall into place. So here's what a NCIC warrant for an individual looks like. This is the generic one that was in your textbook, but it's not a lot of information, and it doesn't have like a narrative. It's not a police report. It's just an NCIC warrant. So this person is wanted, in a different state based on whatever the crime is here. So what it says here, not a crime of violence. Let's see if it shows here. It was a misdemeanor, so they're wanted for a misdemeanor. And it gives the description enough to where if the officer pulled it up, they'd be able to hopefully identify the person. It's got their social security number, a tattoo. That's why it's important, when we talk about making sure that we're factual, accurate, etc. Okay. Here's another example of what a warrant might look like. Again, enough factual information to be able to identify a person. Here's one for a vehicle. So not a person, but a vehicle. And this would be like a wanted bulletin. And maybe you've seen them. And most of us don't go to the post office anymore. I'm older, so I tend to actually go to the post office for things. But you might walk into have you ever seen like a wanted flyer? This is what might be sent to all different agencies. This is the same thing as an attempt to locate a bolo, etc., for this particular person right here. And this in itself is enough for you to detain somebody if you believe that it's this person. And then if you ran that person through NCIC, you would actually get the hit, the warrant. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. There's a couple other examples of what we call either wanted flyers or bolos. Here in Daytona Beach, they actually use the word bolo, which is fine. But these are, typically wanted flyers. But all of this information for each one of these people would be entered into NCIC. This is what you might send around to all the police departments in the area so they know that there's a wanted person. This one here, FBI used to post a lot of their top 10 in the post office. In the olden days, they would put them up on a little pegboard in there, and you could see who the most wanted folks were for the FBI. If you've never seen what this form is, this is what you would fill out as an officer for a stolen vehicle. Kind of hard to see a little bit, but this is what they call a CHP 180. Let me see if I can just drop down here. Oh, here we go. This is a closer kind of look at what a CHP 180 is. So if you had a stolen vehicle to report, you would fill out all these little boxes and all the information, when it was stolen, etc. And the records person or dispatcher would take this report and they would enter it into NCIC as a stolen vehicle. And that way, if any officer ran the license plate, it would come back as a stolen car. So this is typically how these NCIC hits, if you will, how they work. All right, let me jump back into. All right, and to show you what some teletypes look like, we're just going to look at a couple, but just so you can kind of look at it. So if you were sitting in a police car and you looked at someone's criminal history, or even if you just ran their criminal history, this is what it would pop up looking like. So this is kind of an example. It would show this person. It didn't put their name in there for sake of, just for, so we don't put someone's name in there, but their birthday, their sex, their race, height, weight, hair, etc., probation in California. They've been arrested, they have one felony conviction. Oops, let me go down here. And here, out of Sacramento for petty theft, under the influence, and possession of a hypodermic needle. So this was one of their arrests right here. And then some other information that you might see, it would give a little bit more. It might even show the court. It would show that they were sentenced, okay, and a potential felony strike. And then here's the counts. So a lot of data is in here. So now when you go back to like those face pages on your report and you're wondering, gee, why is he having me fill out all these freaking boxes and put everything in there? And it's because when they take data from your reports, from your arrest reports and everything else. And, they're going to use this data in different places. And one could be a person's criminal history. Another could be teletypes for missing persons. And I know it's kind of small, but here's a sample response. If somebody was actually missing, it's very detailed. When you look at it, it would have the person's name. It would say that where they're missing from, their height, their weight, their hair color. Okay, any tattoos, any scars. That way you can identify them. Even their hair length. Here you can see broken or chipped tooth. I mean, so just a lot of information, right? So you can identify a missing person. So if you ran John Smith and this was John Smith, you would know that, hey, John Smith is a missing person out of this particular agency. So that's kind of what a missing person teletype looked like. Restraining orders. If you were involved in some type of dispute and somebody had filed a restraining order against you and that officer ran your name, you would see that this person comes up with a restraining order, and here's the provisions of the order. They have to stay so many feet away, etc. And here's their name. And you can see here, restrained person. They left the name out there. But it's a protective order. So this is all part of NCIC. So it's not just warrants. It's a lot of data that you can get, that you can run through NCIC. Same with sex offenders. If you come across a sex offender and you run their name, you're going to get a hit that's going to look like this. And it's going to say, do not arrest or detain based solely on that, because if they didn't commit a crime, you don't arrest them, right? But now at least you know that you're dealing with a sex offender. Are they standing in front of a school? Or, etc. Are they standing in front of, in a park, near a bathroom, anything that you need here, and it's got all their descriptions, tattoos, when they were in jail, photo available. I mean, and this is good information for you as a police officer to know who you're dealing with. So again, this is something that you would get through NCIC. Here's kind of a closer look at what a sex offender hit would be. We talked about this is Department of Corrections, same thing. If someone's been arrested before. So those are just some teletype things that you can see, but that's why, again, the accuracy in the data is important. It's also important when we talk about booking evidence, and that we know the forms, and we'll look at a couple of them in a minute. That when we book evidence, we have these property sheets. And again, that's why it's important that you document everything on your property sheet. So when you're doing these burglary reports and theft reports, make sure you're adding in the property. And if there's a serial number, put it in there. If it's not, then, if there's not, then that's okay. But that serial number is going to get booked. Get entered into NCIC when you book that property. But, kind of back to, documenting evidence, showing chain of evidence. These are technically little reports, but accuracy, is important. For law enforcement, super important that we maintain what we call chain of custody. We learned this kind of in, towards the beginning of the semester, of an item that you collect from a crime scene. And, depending upon what type of evidence bag you're going to put it in, it's still going to have this little thing you can see down here, chain of possession. Who picked it up? Who booked it? Did someone check it out and take it to court? Did it go to the lab? It's all important that we maintain this accuracy when it comes to chain of custody. Even if it's this type of evidence bag, on anything, you're going to see these, chain of custody. Okay. And this is, it's kind of called, you log basically every person who had access to this particular item of evidence. So that way the court can track it and they know that there hasn't been any funny business with this piece of evidence. It went to the officer found it, the officer booked it, and until court today, it stayed in property, and the officer checked it out and brought it to court. So that's the reason for this chain of custody. Same with basic evidence tags. When you're filling out one of these, It's really important that when you list property, case number, name of the officer, description of property, don't kind of shortcut. If there's something there, it says here victim or incident. If you don't leave it blank, fill out whatever it asks you to fill out. So again, these are all, kind of little reports, but chain of custody is important. So same with firearms. When you book a firearm, make sure it's unloaded. A lot of agencies have these special boxes for firearms, but you can still see up here on the right, chain of custody. So, and it's put in this box for a reason, to make sure that, it's visibly, the slide is open, anyone handling it can see it, there's not going to be an accidental discharge, etc. And it keeps it secure, and if you were going to fingerprint it. So that's why they package it in this type of a box. A lot of times, we don't like to put firearms in bags. If that's all you have, then okay, fine. But typically, it gets sometimes it can get moist in those bags. And because of that, you really want to use paper or the box. But that's for kind of a different class. Evidence report, you've seen one already, so you know what it looks like. So when you're listing property, even pictures that you take, etc., remember, fill out your property report, okay, for whatever is stolen, whatever you did. Make sure you fill that out all the way. Here's what your textbook kind of has an example of a property tag, and you saw an example of a property tag just a couple seconds ago. Here's a different type of property tag. So your book gives you a couple of different variations. Here's some different variations. A lot of times you might even see evidence tape. So if you have a bag, you're going to seal the bag closed with tape, and you're going to put your initials on it and the date to show that you sealed it. So this is how technical it actually kind of gets. So these are some of the miscellaneous things, again, that you're going to have to do, or that you're going to have to use. And as always, you're going to see chain of custody. That's one of the more important things. A couple other real quick things to talk about would be custody sheets. And this is usually required when you book someone into jail on a specific charge. There's a couple of different forms that you're probably going to use. One will be the custody sheet. One would be a medical sheet. And the last one would be a property sheet. Sometimes they build them all into one form, and sometimes they have a couple of separate forms. And then don't forget, we've already done a probable cause form. If you're going to take someone over to, county jail and book them in, you do that little probable cause form. And if you're going to cite release them, you're going to do a citation. Here's a couple of examples of a property evidence report. Just to kind of let you know, this one is from your textbook. Here's an arrest booking application for San Bernardino Sheriff, so you can get an idea on what it looks like. It's got the case number and the person's information, any of the charges, any tattoos or anything, any marks, scars, tattoos on this person. And it's got a couple of medical questions. So that's one example of a booking application. Sometimes there's a whole separate medical sheet that might ask more questions. Here's the same form, but from Riverside County Sheriff. So you can get kind of an idea, a couple of different variations of the form. Pretty much the same though. All the person's information, the arrest information, the charges. They have some miscellaneous information about, you can see like, any suicidal behavior, any special housing needs, etc. So different forms. Here's the probable cause form. You've already seen this before. So if you're going to take someone to county jail, this is one of the little miscellaneous forms that you would fill out to establish probable cause. This is one from San Bernardino County, and this is one from Riverside County. They just look a little bit different, but they're basically the same thing. So again, this kind of shows you different agencies will have different variations of the forms that they use. This is an FI card, which means field interview card. And these are really, really important. It is a miscellaneous form. Technically, it's a report in a sense. It's discoverable, which means that it could end up in court and you might have to testify that you filled it out. And a lot of these have good information, whether it's gang information. But if you don't have enough to arrest somebody, but they're very suspicious, whether they're involved in gang activity, narcotics activity, you think they're a burglar, but you don't have enough to arrest them, you're going to fill out one of these on the person. And you'll basically take this back to the station and you will give it to either records or your crime analysis person. And they enter all of this person's information into a database. So if you have a crime later on, they might be able to match it up with this particular person that you stopped. So once they put all this in there, if this person has, a red baseball hat, blue jeans, just on clothing, that crime analyst can run just the clothing description and it's going to pop up with your FI card. So these are super important and they solve a lot of crimes. And again, it's for when you don't have enough to arrest the person, but you want to identify them because you think they were involved in something, you just couldn't quite prove it. So good information. Here's a different kind of an FI card. It's more of a kind of a sheet of paper instead of an actual card. It's a little bit more detailed. And they even have important information when you get booked into county jail. And we saw this earlier in the semester, at least I believe we did, but if not, every time you get booked into county jail, they will basically run through this form and kind of classify you in a sense, especially for gangs, because they don't want to put a rival gang member into a group with a rival gang member, right? I mean, so they'll ask them questions. Do you belong to a gang? Here it's East Side Santa Paula 12th Street. What's your moniker? It's Rambo, which is pretty cool, right? And then any tattoos, etc. And, let me ask you, can this be used in court later on? Any thoughts? If the person came to court and denied they were a gang member, yeah, I could take this to court and show that we interviewed them, we put this information down, and we signed it, dated it, etc. And there you go. So this is important. This whole part right here, talking about the person's gang affiliation. So again, accuracy. This, all these forms, they're not just busy work, even though it might seem like it, but later on you might have the need to use these forms or use the information. And that's why we kind of always preach accuracy all the time. So super important to remember. Okay. So we did see, let me see if I made sure, I think we went through all of the different forms. We saw the receiving one, we saw the declaration, we saw the CHP 180, we saw the evidence report. Okay, so what I wanted to do is just creep ahead just to the next writing assignment to show you what it is. This week, again, it's a supplemental report. Okay, the week we're in right now. Concentrate, focused on the interview, because it's going to be important when you go to the following week's exercise. Okay, our last written exercise of the semester, I believe. So I'm gonna jump down just real quick and give you kind of a preview. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, so your final week, so after this week, your final week's writing assignment is going to be a domestic violence. The video is not too long, but there are going to be statements in there, etc. I actually gave you a couple of different crimes to choose from, and here I want you to pick the one that fits. So I gave you this penal code section, this penal code section, and this one. And based on the video, you're going to do whatever you do. If you take the person into custody, it's going to be based on one of these. So I want you to pick. So you're going to have to look at the sections. It's not a lot. Here's the premise. And then I also shared with you here, every police department has and is mandated to have a domestic violence policy. And, and you can see how important it is because it's 13 pages long. And it talks about everything, it's got some different, terms, what's the difference between a spouse, cohabitant, what's abuse, what's domestic violence, etc. Here's our policy. Talks about officer safety, of course, misdemeanors. Can you release someone in the field? It goes all the way through private person arrest, protective order, the investigations, what happens if someone's arrested. So you can see how long this policy is. If no arrest is made, there's just a lot of stuff in here. Typically, at least in California, one of the mandates when it comes to domestic violence is that officers are required to arrest the primary aggressor. Okay, so if you've often wondered why somebody, out of the two ends up in custody, it's because they lean towards that. And there's kind of an expectation that the primary aggressor is taken into custody. But if they both end up hitting, punching, etc., they could both end up going to jail, right? There is and has been that possibility. That won't happen in this scenario. I just wanted to kind of roll that out to you. So this is going to be an in-progress domestic violence call. So I just wanted to skip ahead just to kind of give you an idea of where we're going for our final written assignment. And I think that's all that I'm going to kind of cover tonight. So this week, again, supplemental report. You can do the face page if you want. You don't have to, but be thorough on the interview. That's what I'm looking for, because that's going to set you up just to kind of get your juices flowing and set you up for the final writing assignment. And also, just kind of as a last thing here, don't forget the due dates for your interview assignment and your homicide report. You'll be getting a lot of reminders from me, probably to the point of where I'm going to be bothering you. And it'll probably be annoying, but that's kind of how I get towards the end of the semester, just to try to keep you on track. Again, if you have any types of issues or something, don't just say nothing. I'm taking pictures of the roll sheet just so you know. Don't just, kind of ignore it. Let me help you. I'll do the best I can to kind of get you through whatever you need to get through, but I don't know what that is because you're not telling me anything. So again, my job is to, make you successful in the class and to learn something at the same time. But if I don't know about it, I can't help. So that's it. So kind of short tonight, so not a big deal. Have a safe Cinco de Mayo. Have fun, but be safe. And if you're going to go out and drink, great, but don't drive. So that's my message for tonight. Anything else for the good of the order? Anybody have any questions at all?
Do you have class tomorrow? Or not class, but office hours tomorrow?
Yes, ma'am, I do. And I will send something out later on tonight. And thank you for reminding me. I'm going to write that down because I almost kind of forgot. Yeah, so from 6 to 7, I have office hours. So if you need to pop in, typically I'm lonely. Nobody comes to see me. So if you want to pop in and, just say hi or whatever, feel free. Or if you have questions, I'll be there. Anything else for the good of the order? All right, you're all done for tonight.